The Allen Line Company appreciates all of the dedicated carriers it takes to move loads across the U.S. Stay safe.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Scott Thompson.
Welcome to the show. Scott here, filling in for host Mark Reddick this week. But that doesn't mean we won't hear from Mark. Before he left, he got Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers on the line to talk about two new lawsuits he's involved in. One is against the EPA and its new truck emission standards. The other against the California Air Resources Board for its set of rules. The Attorney General tells us why he's taken up this fight. Then a wide variety of people of all ages and experiences make up the OOIDA board. We recently spoke with two younger board members about the importance of being politically active in the trucking industry. And finally, the Truck Leasing Task Force has at least two more meetings on the docket. Bryce Mungin, OOIDA Director of Legislative Affairs, has a preview of the agenda and looks ahead to what FMCSA might eventually be able to do to rein in predatory lease purchase agreements. All that and more coming up over the next hour. But first, the news with Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Scott. The committee created to provide recommendations for reducing the number of underride crashes held its final meeting last week. The Advisory Committee on Underride Protections will send its recommendation to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration by June 30th. There will be two reports, the majority opinion, which will recommend a side underride guard mandate, and a dissenting opinion that points out operational hurdles. Last year, NHTSA issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking that considered requiring side underride guards on tractor trailers. Preliminary research provided by the agency indicated that the annual cost of the mandate would be as much as $1.2 billion, while saving fewer than 20 lives each year. Proponents of the mandate argue that the analysis is flawed and that the number of underride crashes is underreported. Opponents contend that side underride guards are effective only at low speeds and at specific angles. In addition, the guards could lead to unintended consequences and create operational hurdles, such as trailers getting stuck on railroad tracks. The number of loads on the DAT load board for last week is on par with last year's numbers at 2.35 million loads. Stephen Pettit with DAT says the number of trucks posted is down 23% compared to the same week last year. He recently talked about whether or not that will give truckers better negotiating power.
Laws of supply and demand would say that yes, truckers are in a better position. But spot rates really have not moved beyond the increases that you might expect leading into the Memorial Day holiday or during road check, for that matter. Load to truck ratios last week, these are the number of loads on the load board relative to the number of trucks. They also didn't move very much. Vans averaged 4.8 loads per truck on DAT1, reefers 6.9. Flatbeds 18.3. These load to truck ratios are about the same as they were the previous week and about the same as they were again last year. That lack of movement is reflected in the spot rates. National average van rate, $2.01 a mile. That's up a penny from the previous week. Reefer rate, $2.40 a mile, up 5 cents. Again, some seasonal issues there. Flatbed rate, $2.53 a mile, unchanged from the previous week. These are national average rates based on invoices for loads moved from May 19th through the 25th. Averages, of course, they're great, but that rate that really matters is the one that you negotiate with the broker. Every load, every lane, every day is its own opportunity.
Pettit says as we move toward the start of warmer weather, summer and back-to-school retail will begin moving through ports and big warehouse markets. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the way the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is funded does not violate the Constitution. In a 7-2 ruling last week, the court reversed a previous decision by a lower court, which ruled that the CFPB's funding method was in violation because Congress authorized it to draw from the Federal Reserve System rather than annual appropriations. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau began operating in 2011 in an effort to make sure consumers are treated fairly by banks, lenders, and other financial institutions. In recent years, the agency investigated problems caused by the employer-driven debt and presented a report to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's Truck Leasing Task Force. In trucking specifically, the CFPB said some of the problems with lease-purchase agreements include hidden details where drivers don't fully understand the terms of the agreement, no ability to review or negotiate, low earnings, and unexpected paycheck deductions. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg was recently on CBS's Face the Nation. There, he was asked about how there is a lot of talk on the campaign trail about electric vehicles. Back in March, President Biden announced his target for electric vehicles would be 56% of new vehicles by 2032 and 13% for plug-in hybrid.
Every single year, more Americans buy EVs than the year prior. There are two things that I think are needed for that to happen even more quickly. One is the price, which is why the Inflation Reduction Act acted to cut the price of an electric vehicle. The second is making sure we have the charging network we need across America. But I want to talk about the bigger point here. And I take this very personally because I grew up in the industrial Midwest, literally in the shadow of broken down factories from car companies that did not survive into the turn of the century because they didn't keep up with the times.
And many of those auto workers are concerned that electric vehicles require fewer humans to manufacture.
The most important thing is that the EV revolution will happen with or without us, and we've got to make sure that it's American-led.
Buttigieg says under President Biden's leadership, they're making sure the EV revolution will be a Made in America EV revolution. A dip in cross-border freight hauled by truckers in March broke a 3-year trend and made for the first year-to-year drop in March since the pandemic first hit in 2020. According to the latest numbers from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, truck freight valued at more than $86 billion was hauled across the borders in March. That was an increase of 3% from February, but represented a decrease of 4.5% compared to March of 2023. The year-to-year decrease in March was only the third over the past 3 years and was the largest since August of 2020, when cross-border freight went down by 8%. An emergency declaration has been made for 15 counties in Iowa after severe weather caused damage to public and private property, power outages, and large piles of debris. Under the order, regulations pertaining to hours of service are suspended for disaster repair crews as well as drivers delivering goods and services responding to the disaster area. This order pertains to the movement of loads related to the disaster in Iowa on all state highways, excluding the interstate system. Permits are still required according to the order. Drivers and motor carriers operating under this emergency must comply with posted weight limits on roads and bridges. Loads cannot go over the maximum 90,000 pounds gross weight or the maximum axle weight limit of 20,000 pounds. The emergency declaration is in effect till June 20th. Iowa previously issued an emergency due to severe weather in 8 counties. That order is set to expire tomorrow on May 29th. Travel Centers of America has opened 2 new locations. A TA Express is now open in Jonesboro, Arkansas, off Interstate 555 at mile marker 39. This location offers 90 truck parking spaces, along with fuel, convenience items, and a dining option for professional drivers and motorists. Another location is now open in St. Rose, Louisiana, that offers 60 truck parking spaces, along with a variety of amenities. And finally, the world's largest wildlife bridge is set to be built in California. According to the Washington Post, Highway 101 is home to one of the busiest freeways in the country. It's also home to a lot of wildlife. The hope for the bridge is to create a habitat that will connect wildlife that has been separated by the highway. The size will be roughly that of a football field. Construction on the $100 million structure began last month and is expected to open in early 2026. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. Coming up next, we'll fire up that conversation between host Mark Rettig and the Attorney General of Nebraska, Mike Hilgers. He's at the forefront of 2 separate lawsuits right now, one against the EPA and the other against the California Air Resources Board. Attorney General Hilgers explains why he's on the front lines of this fight against emission rules right after this short commercial break. Stick around. Landline Now returns in just a moment.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman is your leading source for quality remanufactured engines and components. Capital Reman stands ready to serve all OOIDA members to help reduce costly engine repairs or replacement. Visit capitalreman.com today and use code OOIDA10 to save.
Get the most power performance out of your rig with Howe's Diesel Defender. It provides maximum lubricity and contains specialized IDX4 detergent to clean and prevent deposits and safely removes harmful water. Visit HowesProducts.com for more information.
Attention professional drivers, do you owe money to the IRS? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. Call for help now, 855-976-4291. That's 855-976-4291.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. 2 lawsuits have been launched over the controversial issues of emission reductions and electric trucks. One targets the EPA's new truck emission standards. The other is aimed at regulations from the California Air Resources Board and its attempts to cut emissions. 24 states are involved in the federal suit, and 17 states are working with the Nebraska Trucking Association on the California action. The efforts are being led by Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers. I spoke with him recently about what's happening. Well, let's start with the federal case here, and I'd like to kind of begin with the basics. What specifically are the 24 states suing the EPA over?
Yeah, so in the federal case, the EPA has issued a regulation, a new rule in the Federal Register that would attempt to create, by effect, not necessarily by the face of the rule, but by effect, it would essentially force the trucking industry, which basically think of that as just essentially the backbone of our supply chain, and transform it from a diesel-based, fossil fuel-based infrastructure to one that's powered on electric vehicle batteries.
I know that the suit lists a number of things that are concerns with that. Could you kind of go over some of the basic reasons that the states are pursuing EPA over that?
Yeah, multiple reasons. One, threshold, before we even get into the actual regulation itself and the dramatic negative impact it would have around the country, is the rule itself is not based on any statutory authority Congress has given the EPA. And so, one of the core principles of our political life in the United States and our constitutional structure is that the people's representatives get to decide very difficult, thorny issues, such as an example, conducting a radical transformation of our supply chain from one based on fossil fuels to electric vehicles, more or less overnight. And the people's representatives in Congress haven't done that, and they haven't given the EPA authority. So the first argument, the first thing that's very concerning, is that the EPA, which isn't directly responsive to any of us. No, I didn't vote for the EPA. I certainly didn't vote for somebody who empowered them to do this. That's the first concerning aspect. The second really goes to the merits, which is pretty dramatic. And so we have this system that works pretty well, and our supply chain works pretty well. It helps keep costs. I know we're in an inflationary environment, but it's helped keep costs lower over the years. We have gas stations on every highway and on all the interstates, and we've got robust diesel engine technology that helps get our semi-trucks long-haul drivers here and there. And what they're trying to do is transform that industry, the supply chain, into something based on really an unproven, unscaled technology that has none of that infrastructure, has none of those types of, doesn't have the charging ports. There's not one charging station in the state of Nebraska for at least a trucking charging station. There's only 100 or so long-haul trucking, Class A tractor trailers in the entire United States that are based on that EV technology. And so it's a radical experiment that it will only result, in my opinion, in higher costs, much higher costs potentially for customers. I think really negatively impacted, devastated trucking industry, lots of lost jobs, a lot of other negative impacts. So those are our two big concerns.
Well, and I would think, too, especially regarding your state of Nebraska, that as a more rural state, as something that's more sparsely populated than some others, that the limited range of electric trucks would be a very practical concern.
Absolutely. And that's in a lot of different ways, but I'll give you one that the EPA certainly didn't talk about, but is a great concern to us. And that goes directly, Mark, to your point on range. If you've got just a very typical Class A tractor trailer, you might get 1,400 miles plus or minus to the trip. That means in a place like Nebraska, you could gas up in Omaha, and I know you're not in Nebraska, Mark, but you could gas up in Omaha and get to a rural community in say, north central Nebraska, and you could do that and come back in one day, which means you can supply the grocery stores there, you can supply the retail outlets there. But if you go to a EV technology, which right now on a good day might only get you 300 miles before you have to recharge, there isn't going to likely be the actual charging infrastructure anywhere near those types of rural communities. And so beyond just the impact on a state like Nebraska economically, you in many ways, I think, would cut off rural communities from resupply in a way that doesn't happen today. And I think it's very alarming for certainly me and I think others in other communities around the country.
You mentioned that particular concern in Nebraska, and you mentioned the other communities. You are in this lawsuit with a group of 24 states. In talking with officials from some of those other states, did they express some additional concerns specific to their jurisdictions?
No, that's a great question, Mark. There's some, not specifically. I think at its core, we were all animated by a concern of the unconstitutional nature of the EPA's action, and also our concern that the country is not well equipped to absorb this radical transformation of the supply chain. It would wreak such havoc on companies, small businesses, and consumers. In Nebraska, we have a very heavy ag industry, as you know, and it's very concerning for us if we can't get our ag products out to market and shipped overseas. And it's an ethanol based. We have a lot of ethanol, a significant portion of the ethanol industry here in Nebraska. Other states may not have quite the same concern. If you're on the coast, maybe you've got some slight different nuanced concern. But those are on the margins. At the end of the day, we are all united in our concern on the big two issues, which is this is a constitutional overreach, and this is going to be devastating to our national economy.
And I would think some of those concerns would also apply to the other lawsuit you've got going on. I think this is a coalition of 17 states regarding California's specific emissions regulations there. I know there are some differences. Can you kind of go over the basis of that lawsuit, the legal basis?
Absolutely. There are some differences, but it's similar in the sense that you have an unelected bureaucracy. In the case of the federal action, that's the EPA. In the case of the California action, it's an entity called the California Air Resources Board, which is unelected. Certainly, no one in Nebraska voted for the California Air Resources Board. But so in that case, they're similar. It's a little bit of a different mechanism. The mandate's a little bit more explicit in California than it is in the EPA. The constitutional issues are slightly different in the context of the EPA. Congress may have the authority to do what the EPA tried to do. Congress hasn't done it. Therefore, the EPA's action is unconstitutional. What we're arguing is that the California, even if CARB could do what it did, we don't think it's got the constitutional authority or federal statutory authority to do what it does. That one state can't essentially use its access to its ports or its transportation infrastructure as leverage to dictate national supply chain solutions to every other state. So the arguments are slightly different, and there's some nuance between the rules. But at the end of the day, in both cases, California and EPA, you have unelected regulators going outside of their power in a way that would radically transform in really negative ways our supply chain infrastructure around the country.
I would think in the California case also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that truckers talk about a lot is the interstate commerce clause and the interstate nature of trucking. How does that play into this case?
It's a great question. So under the Constitution, we all are sovereign states, and there's certain things that we gave to the federal government. One of those things is to regulate interstate commerce. And one of the implications of that is that the states, within certain circumstances, can't themselves regulate interstate commerce. And that's, I think, you see that kind of most directly in the transportation context. So for an example, the U.S. Supreme Court has looked pretty dimly at states being able to, say, for instance, change the railroad gauge. You don't want to have a railroad, the width of a railroad line running through Nebraska at some certain width, and then once it gets to Colorado, it's got to change dramatically. You can see that'd be pretty disruptive and create a lot of friction to interstate commerce. The Supreme Court's also actually looked pretty dimly at even states regulating things like the size of mud flaps on tractor trailers. And that may not seem as obvious as railroad, but the point is you don't want to have a tractor trailer driving from, California, have to have one mud flap, and then into Nevada and have to change mud flaps or it's not following the law. So it makes good sense logically. It also is under our Constitution that there should be certain rules that are interstate only and that only Congress can change. And so what California has done is said, well, you can't access our ports unless you actually adopt this very new, unscaled, untested technology in your trucking fleet. And I think our argument is, hey, that runs afoul of our constitutional provisions around interstate commerce.
I'm wondering if you can tell us here in the time we have left, kind of what stage of the process both of these lawsuits are at right now, and what is the next action you're expecting?
Well, the stage of the process is the very beginning where you file the actual complaint. So in California, we filed a complaint in district court in the Eastern District of California. In the EPA context of the EPA, we filed a complaint in D.C. Circuit Court, so the District Court of Appeals of the D.C. Circuit, which is what you're supposed to do when you file these types of pleadings. When you challenge EPA rules, you have to go to the D.C. Circuit Court. And so there's various ways that these cases could resolve themselves through a settlement or through trial or through summary judgment, some sort of preliminary injunction. None of those things are before us at the moment, and we'll see how some of these things play out. But we are at the earliest stages, but we think this is the right time to file these suits to get in front of the EPA and California's action. Because as you know, Mark, you can't just go pick up a new tractor trailer off the street. First of all, they don't even really exist. And for manufacturers, companies to rely on this kind of rule, it takes them years to sort of adjust their behavior and get the right parts in place and be able to source the vehicles. And we want to get it in front of it now so that we can put a stop to these rules before they get too far along.
Now, as I understand it, sir, this is not the only legal action you've either started or participated in against federal emission and pollution regulations. Can you just mention some of the others that you have been involved in?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Mark. There's been quite a bit. There's been efforts from the Biden administration to essentially try to shut down coal-fired power plants in the country, which is a huge deal to Nebraska and some of the other states. There's been other companion efforts to expand mandates on what you might think of just passenger car vehicles on the electric vehicle side. There have been quite a few climate related. There's also been things that aren't directly on technologies, but have been requirements, say, to require certain disclosures, climate disclosures through the SEC, as an example. So there's been kind of an all-out assault from a number of different fronts, from the federal government in particular, but also places like California, to really drive a specific climate agenda outside of the norms and the way that our constitutional republic typically works, which is allow our elected representatives to have a say. So when that happens, we lose a fair fight in Congress, and the entity with the appropriate power makes a decision. We have to live with that, and we have to fight another day politically. But when they go outside of the rules, that's where we're going to fight. And it's gone on it's happened a few times already, and we fought those. We're fighting with our sister states on those, and we're going to continue to fight if there are more actions down the road.
Okay. Well, that's all I had, sir. Is there anything else that you want to add, or maybe I didn't ask about that I should have?
No, I appreciate it, Mark, and I'm very grateful for all the great men and women who help keep our trucking industry so strong. I mean, when you look at the numbers, well over 80%, of our supply chain or community, no matter how you slice and dice it, is in some way, either directly or indirectly, influenced or impacted by our trucking industry. And they are really unsung heroes of our economy. They help keep our prices low. They help keep goods moved. They help make sure that small communities in Nebraska or elsewhere are sourced with food, fresh food and produce. And it's a lot of work, and they should be able to go make their living with the tools that they have at their disposal. They're great stewards of our economy, of our climate in the first place, because they're trying to institute new clean energy technologies in their current diesel engines. And so I'm just very grateful for them, and we're going to continue to stand up for that industry and so many people who are influenced and impacted by that industry. And we'll do our part, because we think it's our obligation to help support the great men and women in that industry. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about these issues.
That was Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers talking about two lawsuits, one against the federal government and the other against California, both over emission regulations. We'll be back in just a moment. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2024 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Welcome back. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association board is made up of more than 24 members. All bring a different perspective to the table, especially 2 of the younger alternate board members. Matt Bradley has been trucking for a little over a decade. He joins me now. Matt, what made you want to become a member of OOIDA?
Even before I became a trucker, I was always interested in politics, and so I love the mission of OOIDA and how they would go and stand on behalf of truckers everywhere and represent truckers.
And you became a member. How long after that did you start to take interest in becoming a board member?
Ever since I had joined. Even kind of before I joined, I kind of wanted it to be a goal of mine was to get on the board to, add a different perspective and view. So it's kind of a long-term thing or a personal goal of mine.
And talk to me about the importance of, having yourself on the board to add that different perspective.
I would say it's very important to be on the board because of my generation. I'm a millennial, so I can kind of reach back to, different generations, reach forward to newer generations and kind of pick ideas and issues and how to communicate with the newer generation of truckers. And then, growing up, I was called an old soul because I would always listen to the older folks. So I like to listen to the older truckers because you can gain so much wisdom from that. So I think bringing all those perspectives to the board helps a lot. So you can kind of reach back, say, okay, hey, this is what's going on the ground, and then go back, take it to the board, and talk to the older members and say, hey, this is what some of the younger drivers are saying or dealing with.
Now, becoming a member of OOIDA, of course, a big part of the association's job is advocacy. How important is it for you to be politically active?
It's very important to me because it's a part of the civic process. I'm getting numerous calls right now personally, to get back on the school board. So at home, so being very politically involved, whether it's just, researching candidates, researching issues, going to your local council meetings, it impacts everything. And a lot of drivers don't know that being politically involved, even if it's just a little bit, impacts trucking as well, whether it's just writing a letter to a congressperson, finding out who your local council member is when you're trying to park at home.
Do you find it's more the older generation that are more politically involved, or do you see people like yourself that are taking an interest, that are, contacting lawmakers and kind of putting their 2 cents into things, kind of in hopes for some change?
I kind of want to say I see more of the older people doing it, which is not a bad thing, but the older people, are doing it because they kind of know the process of how to do everything, whereas with the newer generation, it's an issue of, okay, I'm just out here driving to, make money. And what does politics have to do with me? It's too messy. It's too much this, too much that. But, with the younger generation, I'm like, hey, trucking, there's a lot to do with politics and trucking as well.
What is your advice for younger truck drivers to encourage them to become more politically active?
My advice is to, learn the major issues. It doesn't have to be anything major at the moment, but just kind of go into it slowly. Start finding out what's going on locally, what's going on statewide. And my advice is, regardless of your political views, you can always reach out to a lawmaker, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, because they represent your interests as well, not just one side. And then having that conversation and reaching out or, networking with someone who's politically active. So that would be my advice. Network, start reaching out, start researching.
And what's your advice for drivers, young and old, to not get frustrated, especially with how slow things can move in D.C.?
My advice, and I've always heard it as well, being on both sides of the political thing, is that change happens slowly. It's a marathon and not a sprint. So, you may not see anything happen just yet. Just know that it's going through the necessary steps. So remember, marathon, not a sprint. And then sometimes it may be a lame duck session where it's almost an election year. Things won't happen right there and there unless it's very urgent. So just stay encouraged while you're waiting. It's happening. We're working on it. We hear you.
How do you stay informed on big issues? Do you depend on social media, or how do you do that?
I depend on social media, talking to other drivers, landline, of course, landline, when it comes up on Twitter or when the magazine comes to the house, emails from the board. I have so many newspaper subscriptions, so something may come up. I may have an email link to different committees that are in Congress and to the main DOT email. So that's how I stay, on top of everything.
And lastly, what would you say? You kind of touched on a few things, but what would you say to younger drivers who are out there, not really having a ton of interest in the political arena or what's going on? What encouragement would you have for them?
Get into the fight. Don't, just come out here and, get out here, establish a career, and then complain about what's going on. Start researching candidates. Start researching your different politicians. Start researching who is on what committee. Start reaching out to OOIDA. Jump on social media and kind of find groups or get educated on the topic, because politically speaking, like I said before, everything impacts trucking.
That was Matt Bradley talking about the importance of being politically active in the trucking industry. Harry Smith joins me now. He is a fifth-generation trucker who serves as an alternate OOIDA board member. Harry, what made you want to be on the board?
A great opportunity to give back to the industry I love and to represent a segment of the industry that I don't think OOIDA captures, but it's not OOIDA's fault. It's because people say, well, I'm going to get out of over-the-road trucking, and then they go into the scope where I work, and that's I want to be that bridge between the local guys, if you will, and then our over-the-road truckers that run, thousands of miles a week.
Now, being a member of OOIDA, a big part of the association's job is advocacy. How important is it to you to be politically active?
100%. That's the sole purpose for OOIDA's existence, is to help steer and hopefully stop bad regulations and steer our politicians that are hell-bent on adding something to our regulatory obligations and steering it to something that's not as bad as it could be. Because as our Louis Pugh says, if you're not at the table, you're on the table. Mm-hmm. And that's 100% true.
What would you say your advice is for younger truck drivers getting into the industry when it comes to being politically active?
Boy, it's so tough to dedicate time to paying attention to what they're doing, but understanding which politicians vote which way is so important, and understanding that sometimes there's Democrat politicians that align with, our typical Republican guys. And those are the people we really want to pay attention to and try and help push on to, more of the thought strategy that helps truckers. So paying attention to who your state representatives are is imperative, and then is okay, but your federal, my Mitt Romney and Mike Lee, those are the guys that you really got to pay attention to and see what they're doing and try and get involved with what they have going on, even if it's just commenting on their Twitter or their Instagram. I mean, for young people, that's how you're either their biggest cheerleader or their biggest guy saying, we don't want to vote for this guy because he thinks that we should have speed limiters.
How do you stay informed on the big issues? Do you depend on social media or other outlets?
Yeah, I'm a total social media guy. I pretty much use X exclusively for political stuff. Then I have Instagram for fun, family, work life. I do follow some of the political leaders that I really like on Instagram. They're to see their personal life, but as far as where I want to see an update on the parking bill and speed limiters, I'm getting that flow of info from X along with the OOIDA emails.
Now, OOIDA is always encouraging members to contact lawmakers about different issues. Do you find it's intimidating to do that? Have you ever done that? Have you ever used the Fighting for Truckers?
It does seem totally, maybe not scary, but like you feel like it's totally pointless. As 1 in 3.5 million people in Utah, you might feel totally useless when you call your senator and leave a voicemail or email them. But the impact it has is definitely felt and seen. So it seems like you're just swimming upstream, but when you do submit a inquiry to your elected leaders, those matter. Even if it's just your one single voice, it matters. They have a team of, people don't understand that they have a team of assistants gathering this data and saying, hey, we got 80% of the people that just mailed in, and they said do this on this political item. So they pay attention to that because they want to get reelected. And as a young voter, you don't understand the impact that you can have in, talking to or writing to your elected leaders. And the best way I found to do that is as I follow along with OOIDA, and I have some other shared access land alliances that I pay real close attention to, and even regarding filling Lake Powell, if you will. But you get behind a cheerleader for one of those campaigns, and they can set up an email platform that links you directly to your elected leader, and then you can write an email in just a few sentences and hit send. And it seems it's very easy. You can do it with your phone right at your fingertips just while you're having lunch. And again, that impact is definitely felt by those elected leaders when you pile up an inbox full of emails championing a cause. I think that's the best way to try and push our elected leaders into fighting for truckers.
And lastly, how do you feel like your dad has encouraged you when it comes to kind of being politically in the know and keeping up on issues and taking an interest in things?
Oh, he's a great leader in that way. He is not afraid of any politician. He knows that that politician puts their pants on the same way he puts his pants on. They're just a human. They're not special by any means. They're definitely no more valuable to our society than he is. And he treats them with the same respect he would like to be treated with, but they're his level opponent, if you will, or his level partner. And that's a great example to show is you don't need to be afraid. You just be yourself, have that mutual respect. And then that helps get your, break the ice, if you will, or it just helps you have some confidence. So that's the biggest takeaway. Don't be scared. Because I think a lot of people are scared. I mean, politicians have power, and, I'm just one little guy. How could me dissenting against this politician's last move that hurt my trucking industry, how can my one little dissent make a difference? So it's easy to feel small, but the message is you're not small. You're never small.
That was Harry Smith talking about his experience on the OOIDA board and how he stays up to date on political issues that impact trucking. For more information on how you can take action and contact lawmakers, you can visit fightingfortruckers.com. There, you'll find a list of current issues, information on your lawmaker, and how to contact them to make sure your voice is heard. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Firestone tires are for more of everything, with more durability for more miles and more confidence in your fleet. Firestone's tested tires help fleets save with value where it matters most. Learn more at bridgestonenationalfleet.com/4moremiles.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine VibraTech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with VibraTech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline now, welcome back. We'll close things out today by looking ahead to the close of a task force that was formed to address predatory practices in the lease-purchase model. Joining us with a review of what the Truck Leasing Task Force has achieved and a preview of its next two meetings is Bryce Mungin. Bryce is OOIDA's Director of Legislative Affairs, and he joins us on the line now from our nation's capital. Bryce, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Scott. How about you?
Doing great over here. So we're going to talk about the Truck Leasing Task Force here. Just announced its next two meetings on June 13th and July 18th. Before we get into what we can expect from those two meetings here, let's refresh some memories out there about what this group was formed to do.
Yes, so this task force was actually required by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA, and it requires a DOT and FMCSA to look at lease purchase agreements and determine what are their effects on the trucking industry, what are their effects on safety in the trucking industry, and what are their effects on truckers to be able to really truly operate their own small trucking business as they purport to do. So it's really something we had been asking for a long time, because we know there's a lot of really bad agreements out there. And so this task force has been looking at what are the typical lease agreements, what are the terms of these agreements, and really digging into the specifics.
And we'll talk here in just a moment or two about what we can maybe expect as they close this group out. But I do want to point out that, and not to pick on the side underwrite committee at all, but they've had their issues, I think it's safe to say. This task force, however, has really found a lot of common ground, I would say. And it seems like they're all on the same page in terms of there being a real problem with this business model and, an agreement that there needs to be something done about it. It's been refreshing to some degree, I think.
Yeah, and I think too, kind of how we've approached this for a long time, and what we've heard from a long time is, I think everyone kind of agrees there are bad actors out there, and there are bad lease purchase or lease to own agreements. So I think that could be part of the reason why is that there is agreement that just straight up taking advantage of drivers and these predatory agreements are not a good thing. And it's also just really, I think, hard to defend them privately, but also publicly. So I think that can be part of the reason why there's been seemingly more public agreement on this issue.
Let's go over these next two meetings here. As I mentioned, June 13th and July 18th. We'll take these one by one here because we do have the agenda for each of these meetings now. Let's start with the one in June, on June 13th. What does the group plan to talk about for that one?
Yeah, so what they'll be taking up during that meeting is whether truck leasing agreements incentivize safe operation of vehicles, whether these agreements help drivers comply with hours of service regulations and other speed and other general safety regulations. So I think that's something that's really important to look at, because you consider if someone is in a bad financial situation, they're in a bad lease agreement, you could certainly understand how people might be looking to cut corners or minimize their costs in any way possible. And that could very oftentimes come at the expense of safety. And the other thing it looks like they'll be talking about is a presentation from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, what they have found on the leases that have been submitted. So I know that they've been going through leases that have been submitted. What are the terms there? And kind of trying to figure out what's the effect of the specifics of these leases.
Yeah, you mentioned something interesting there. You mentioned the safety aspect of this, and this is FMCSA's, I guess it falls under the umbrella of FMCSA, so there is a safety aspect there. And that's kind of where I think FMCSA is approaching this, right?
Yeah.
Is that it is under all of this pressure here. It is a safety thing first and foremost, which is why they are talking about this in particular and have been talking about it. But the next time in particular, they're talking about the safety aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's this kind of actually gets to, I think, a little bit bigger frustration that we have with sometimes with FMCSA is, their mandate is safety is what they constantly remind us. And so when you start getting into the economics of the industry or really kind of other matters of fairness, it seems like FMCSA tries to pull back or say that's not really their jurisdiction. But what's really important about this task force is it was mandated by Congress. So, whether or not FMCSA wanted to do this or whether they thought there was a big enough connection between safety and these lease agreements, it's something that they have to do. And so I agree with you. I don't think it's surprising that's where they're focusing a lot of their work. But also, it's important that to point out that the bipartisan infrastructure law required that FMCSA look at the safety aspect of this, because this is something OOIDA has been saying for a long time, which is, there's potential negative safety consequences of these agreements.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, again, that's kind of the agenda there for the June 13th meeting. Let's fast forward to July 18th is the second meeting that's coming up here. What do they plan to talk about for that one?
So for this one, the agenda is they'll be discussing the opportunity that equitable leasing agreements provide for drivers to start or expand trucking companies, and the history of motor carriers starting from single owner operators. So, for people who are listening out there, that sounds like figuring out, do these lease agreements really live up to their promise of allowing truckers to become independent, to become their own boss, to go out and start their own trucking company? Because we know that's how these are marketed very frequently is, are you tired of being a company driver? You want to finally have some say over what you do? Well, put your name on the dotted line here, and here's your chance to become your own boss. And, after this, you'll be your own trucking company. So it's going to be really important to examine that and figure out what are the actual outcomes of these lease agreements, and do they live up to that promise?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this one, too, they had that public meeting at Matt's earlier this year. And person after person came up to the mic or, came in through Zoom and basically told their horror story about what happened to them. And it seemed like every one of them had 5 others that they knew that went through the same thing. So, the stories are out there. We've all heard them. They're bad on every level, really. And again, FMCSA does seem to be on board with these changes. We saw that at Matt's too, with FMCSA's representation essentially, saying we need to do something about this. My question here we'll kind of wrap this up here as we look toward the end of this, which is coming up relatively soon. What can FMCSA realistically do? And are you optimistic that we're going to see some real action and some real change on this issue?
Yeah, so FMCSA by law is required to publish a report after this task force. So they're going to look at all the questions that we've been discussing here and others. They're also going to make recommendations if they find it appropriate on kind of what should be done with these lease agreements and any possible changes that could be helpful in kind of cutting back on some of the abusive practices that we've seen here.
Yeah. Are you optimistic we're going to see something? I mean, I know these things take time and they're slow, but are you feeling good?
I think it will be helpful to make some incremental change, possibly, but you know how these things go. We talk all the time about reports to Congress and things like that, and very rarely do you see wholesale changes coming out of this, but it certainly is an important starting point to try and make headway on the how drivers are being abused with these.
Yeah, and again, just the stories that we continue to hear throughout these meetings and the questions and concerns that are raised. it does kind of make me optimistic that we're going to see some action. But as you point out, change is slow, especially in Washington, D.C. But we're heading in the right direction, I think, and we can take some solace in that. Bryce, we'll have to leave it there. We appreciate your time as always and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Scott.
And that's our show for today. We thank you for listening. You can get all the latest news and analysis from the trucking industry 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at landline.media, which is also where you can find all of our archived shows from the past. Until next time, take care and drive safe out there.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.